Well, Eli Gold's been a big friend, a good friend for a long, long time. The only problem I have with him is that when he goes off on speaking engagements, you would think when they ask him to say something about some of the coaches and so forth that he talked about what football coaches did that was screwed up. But he always talks about something I did. he always finds some silly something I did, but he's been a terrific friend, and we're doing a couple of 3 games together this year. These next 2 or 3 weeks. Good morning, Eli. How you doing?
I am well, gentlemen. It's good to be on with you. And, of course, Wimp, I share stories with people because they love you and they want to know more about you. But I hadn't heard that Freddie Kitchens to Dennis Riddle audio cut in a long, long time. A great memory right there for Bama fans.
Well, Dad stayed up all night, Eli, getting that cut and getting that ready to play for you when you came on the show.
Well, it's very, very nice.
Eli, how many Alabama-Auburn games?
This will be my 30th to broadcast.
Yeah, this is your 30th year, right?
Yeah, sure was. And the one before I was hired to do football, I didn't do the Iron Bowl game because I was in Richmond, Virginia with the basketball team. Okay. And I remember we came on right after the Iron Bowl wrapped up because, as folks may remember, I did a year of hoops before I started doing football. But that first year, I was with you and the basketball team in Richmond to play the Spiders. But yeah, this will be my 30th game to call, my 30th Iron Bowl.
All right, tell our listeners, I don't know, we're going to say the 2 most favorite, the 2 most exciting, the 2 most whatevers that you.
Oh gosh,
2 or 3.
There are a number of things that come to mind. One, of course, is one that I did not call, and that was the Van Tiffen kick. When Shula threw to Greg Richardson to keep that drive alive, and he got out of bounds. So that was a very, very impactful game, though it was Paul Kennedy and Doug Layton who did that broadcast. The one you just played was very memorable. The pass to Roy Upchurch to win the game was very, very memorable. Of course, I was there when the series moved to the campuses.
Right.
And I remember that first game going down to Auburn, which was not a favorite. It was certainly memorable because of, the hype of the games being played on campus. Then I do remember, when Bama finally won at Jordan-Hare Stadium. That was big. And, of course, the Tide has posted a few shutouts in these 30 years. And obviously, when you say memorable, it was far from a favorite.
Yeah.
But obviously that kick 6 game is memorable. That's something you never forget. But it sure as heck wasn't a favorite.
Sure.
So I've called a number of very interesting Iron Bowls over the years.
Eli, what makes this game different? As the players prepare, they know. Everybody says, you take on one game at a time, and that's coach speak, that's player speak, but they understand the importance of this game. What makes this game so unique and so different?
Well, I guess it's because of where we live. I've had the pleasure and honor of broadcasting the Michigan State game. It has fallen on 2 years. It fell on an Alabama off weekend, and the national radio networks asked me to come in and do that game on the national networks, and it was big, but it was buried in the sports picture of the state of Michigan. On Friday night before the Michigan State game, the TV stations opened up with, in one case, it was the Detroit Tigers being, in the World Series. And then they talked about the Red Wings, and they talked about the Detroit Lions coming up on Sunday. And now let's get to college football and talk about the matchup. Another year, in the newspaper, in the Detroit News, you had to go to page 6 to get the coverage. I've had the pleasure of doing the UCLA USC game, again, falling on a weekend when I was off and was asked to do that game on one of the national radio networks. And, there was so much going on in the Los Angeles sports scene. They talked about everything, and then they got to USC, UCLA. Well, here we all know we don't have the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL. We don't have that. And what has also been significant over the years is that more often than not, one team, if not both of them, are ranked in the top 25, oftentimes in the top 10. So the game has not only local, statewide bragging right implications, but it has national sports picture application, and all of that, I think, adds up to the fact that this game has become unique over the years, because it's not just for bragging rights, but it's for bragging rights in a state where collegiate sports is king, and it's between two schools that more often than not have national implications, so that's what makes it special.
Sure, Dan.
Eli, I know preparation is important for you. I see how you prepare and your stuff and your notes and all when I sit next to you, and just like we try to prepare as coaches. Has there ever been a time when all of a sudden they call you the night before of something to do, and all of a sudden you have got, they want you to do a last-minute game somewhere that's Booger Bear game, and you got to figure out exactly, you don't even know who the coach is hardly. Has that ever happened to you?
It has happened to me.
How'd you handle it?
It happened to me in basketball, Wimp. It was very interesting because in football, you normally have a few days lead, and you certainly do normally in basketball as well. But I forget what year it was, but David Hobbs was still the head coach for Bama in basketball. And I was sitting at home on a Saturday. The Tide was playing an unusual Sunday basketball game. And I was sitting at home on Saturday, and my phone rings, and it was the executive producer of CBS Sports. And it seemed that Jim Nantz, it's weird how things happen in our business, and I'm not comparing myself with these guys, but the fact was Jim Nantz was out on the West Coast, and he got laryngitis prior to doing a UCLA-Arizona basketball game with Billy Packer. And that was one of the two games that were being played on Sunday. The second game was Georgia and South Carolina in Athens. That game was going to be done by Tim Brando and Coach Al McGuire. Well, all of a sudden, Brando comes down with laryngitis. They have to act quickly. They take Brando, they take Tim Brando, fly him from Athens, Georgia, out to the West Coast to work with Billy Packer, and they need somebody in our general region of the country who knew something about Georgia and South Carolina to do the telecast with Al McGuire. And they started checking around, and they realized that Bama had already played both Georgia and South Carolina that year. And they said, let's see if old Eli can do the telecast. Well, obviously, this is Saturday afternoon, and I had to get permission from a number of people. I had to get permission from a number of people to miss that Bama broadcast and go do the game for CBS. We contacted everybody that was necessary. They gave me the clearance to go. And then I got in my car, drove to Athens. They brought to the hotel all the game notes, all the information, all the stats, what have you. And I don't think I got to Athens till about probably 6 or 7 o'clock that night. And I stayed up until probably 1 or 2 in the morning and just had to cram for that broadcast. And I mean, I'm working with Al McGuire, for crying out loud. I'd never met him. I knew him, obviously, knew of him. Michelle Tafoya, who is still working today, she was in the studio for CBS. So it was a high-profile game, and I didn't want to screw up. So I worked and then got up early, went to practice, hung out, watched Coach McGuire do his thing, which was worth the price of admission right there.
Yeah.
And ended up doing that telecast. So that was the only time it's happened on an overnight kind of cram type of situation. And thankfully, like I said, Bama had already played Georgia and the Gamecocks, so I had, some working knowledge of both teams.
Sure.
But that was kind of scary, because here all of a sudden I was getting a chance to work with CBS, and I didn't want to screw it up. And there was a big game. I forget all the circumstances, but it was a significant game in the SEC East. That's why it was on national television. And to get called in to fill in for Brando, who was filling in for Jim Nance, was pretty heady stuff for a young guy.
Yeah, it sure was.
Eli, as you prepare for these Auburn games, and I've been saying, I think Gus Malzahn, maybe, I don't want to say coaches differently than other coaches in this particular game against Alabama, but I think he has a belief that he can beat Alabama. And I think some of these teams and some of these coaches hope they can, but deep down they don't really believe it. I think this guy believes it, and I think his football team seems to believe it. Now, that doesn't happen every year, but he's had as much success against Nick Saban as anybody. Do you see any difference in Auburn when they play Alabama as opposed to maybe some of these other teams and some of your preparation?
I honestly can't say. I don't know. I don't, my preparation for a game of this nature, or any game, is factual stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's factual stuff. I'm memorizing names, numbers. I'm preparing biographies. I'm getting information, statistics. I'm watching film to see what they might do. And interestingly, for me, preparing for an Iron Bowl is a little bit easier than most any other game, because, I live here. So I live here in Birmingham, but on the nightly news, every night you're getting not only Alabama stuff, but Auburn stuff. So you kind of know what's going on the other side of the state. It was far more difficult to prepare for Arkansas State or the Citadel than it is for this weekend, because you knew nothing about the Citadel. I knew virtually nothing about Arkansas State. At least you have a working knowledge of what's been going on throughout the season at Auburn and who their big players are. You see them on the TV, so you know their uniform numbers, et cetera, et cetera. But to say that I know what goes on in the mind of an opposing coach or opposing players, of course, I've never played, but my thinking is you've got to go in believing you can win. You've got to go in believing that you can get the job done. And, and they're not a bad team by any stretch.
No.
Auburn's had some issues. They've had ups and downs. They've won. They've lost, whatever. Nobody, I can't imagine that going into the season they expected to have 4 losses at this time of the year. But you scrape away a lot of that stuff, and it's a darn good football team. So, I would expect that they should believe that they can win. But with all of that said, I don't think there's any question Alabama is the better ball club.
Sure.
I don't think there's any question about that. But if Gus Malzahn didn't believe that his team could win, that would be wrong.
Sure.
Eli, with the names that we have today, and we've got some booger bears names that you try to pronounce, they drive you. That's the reason I when I'm with you, I call them by number.
Yeah.
Is is it where you go back to the SID and say to him, because you can't find the guy, tell me, and I know they send you a sheet sometimes of pronunciations,
right,
broken down. I've even had some of those myself in some of the games I've done away from Tuscaloosa. Is it a difficult thing to get that? Because there's nothing worse than to mispronounce the guy's name.
Exactly.
Everybody calls me Wimp. A lot of people call me Wimp Sanders.
Really?
And they just can't get the sun on there sometimes. So, but I get called Wimp Sanders all the time. Talk about that a little bit.
I've never had a problem with getting that information. I usually, of course, every school provides a pronunciation guide to start with. But then I'll normally check in, not so much with the sports information guy, although that's always a good resource, whether whomever he or she is, but I will usually go to the other team's broadcaster.
Okay.
And I'll say this guy's name for me.
Okay.
And I will, spell it out phonetically on my chart and work with that. Sometimes, it's a very, very difficult name, and you screw it up, and you apologize, and you get back to it, because you're right. You never want to have everybody deserves to have their name pronounced correctly. Yeah. So you work hard at that. But there was one team this year where they had a tight end, and it was a long, it's a true story. Bama played a team, had a long last name. His name was Albert, and its last name started with O, and it went forever. And they said, try and pronounce it once on the air, but then for the rest of the day, this is from the school, but for the rest of the day, calling him Albert O will be appropriate.
Good.
So sometimes it's just so much of a tongue twister that the school actually had that in their press notes. Try pronouncing it once, here's how it's pronounced, but for the rest of the day, Albert O will be an appropriate reference on the air. But I'll try and make sure. I remember when I think you were still the coach when maybe not, when Bama played Belarus in a preseason basketball game. And man, their names were about a mile long, and everything was either vowels or consonants. It was a tongue twisting kind of night, but everybody deserves to have their name pronounced correctly, so I try to do that as best I can.
Right.
Eli, in working with John Parker Wilson, who obviously was the quarterback, throughout the season, maybe when he's seen some of the things that Tua's done, what's been his reaction in the booth to something? He knows how hard it is. This kind of makes it look easy.
Yeah, kind of like the rest of us. We'll just kind of shake our heads in amazement.
Yeah.
At some of this, you see that on the practice field, you see that in the games. And even Rashad Johnson, who is now our new sideline guy, and of course is being used more and more as an extra analyst, because JP has the offense covered. Rashad played defensive back, so it's almost like we've got two different analysts on the broadcast, and sometimes you just have to sit there and just shake your head in amazement, or you come up with a one-word analysis of wow. It's just remarkable. A very, very, and you know what? On top of everything else, and you guys appreciate this too. He and Jalen, and they're wonderful young men, wonderful guys. So you're happy to see them do well, and that good character, carries over and is infectious. But yes, sometimes you just look at these plays and you say, how in the world did he do that? Whatever that was, how the heck did he ever do that? And it's something to watch.
Eli, we sure do appreciate you being on. I know Saturday people will be listening to you wherever they might be, and you and I got a game on the 26th, I think, so I'll see you then.
Yeah, we got Bama and Murray State we're working together.
So.
Don't try to steal his line, Booger Bear, Eli. That's Dad's line.
Well, I have never touched that. That's copyrighted and trademarked.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Eli.
All right, fellas, take care. See ya.
Appreciate it. Very good, very good.